Welcome to the Oh Brother Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith.
The podcast is Brother. Oh, brother.
Ah, I see what you did
Little
there.
little lead
Because
in
it's
there.
because we're talking about Bond, James
James
Bond.
Bond.
It's funny. We're going to talk about Thunderball, and we were on a recent episode. We were reviewing a movie called Cleaner, starring Daisy Ridley, and we were talking about Martin Campbell, who of course directed Casino Royale and Goldeneye. So we were already sort of talking Bond, and then realized there's a lot of Bond
Anniversaries.
anniversaries, and I think Goldeneye it's the 30th, if I'm not mistaken, and then
Yeah,
right.
actually, we're doing Thunderball, which is 60.
Right.
Ironically, and I didn't know this, Goldfinger is also 60. Although it says it came out the year before, it technically
Right.
came out in January of, I forget the year, but the same year, Thunderball came out December. That's how they used to
Right.
crank these things out, like, every year.
So it would have been 65.
No, they're both 60. They both came out in the same year, calendar year.
No, no, no,
One
I'm saying
January.
1965.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
You said
Thunderball came out
65, I was thinking anniversary.
yeah, Thunderball was released in the States December 22nd, 1965.
Okay.
Yeah, and you've got much more of the history here than I do, and it's interesting because I was telling you we were talking a little bit about our bonds. Everybody at this point, given there's been so many who have portrayed the role and we're anxiously, eagerly awaiting to find out what that next announcement is. We'll talk a little bit about where Bond is as of the current day. But I had said that based on when I was growing up, Roger Moore was my Bond because it was very late 70s when it was 1979, I think, when uh, was it
Live and
Li-
Let Die was his
Live and Let Die,
first.
right? Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right. And then,
And
Octopussy, Moonraker, all those films.
A View
Those were
to a Kill turns 40.
View to a Kill. Yeah.
GoldenEye 30, Spectre with Daniel Craig is already 10 years old.
Or Spectre, as it were.
Spectre, yeah,
Yeah, which is relevant to Thunderball, of
correct.
course, right? So 60-year anniversary of Thunderball, and why did we ultimately land on this one?
I had been watching because the 4Ks just came out, the Sean Connery 4Ks. So
Yeah.
it was gonna be a Sean Connery pick.
Mhm.
And then I thought about you maybe not seeing some of them, and I thought, first of all, Thunderball, based on the novel by Ian Fleming, was supposed to be the first Bond film released. Although it wasn't written first, Casino Royale was written first.
Right, there was this litigation that took
Correct,
place,
which
and it
Bond
yeah,
has a huge history of that.
talk about that a little bit in this case because it's interesting that there's, ultimately credit given in the credits of the film to, I wrote it down, it was, Jack Whittingham and Kevin, McClory, I guess, were the 2,
Right,
right, and there was this whole thing between them and Ian Fleming.
correct.
Yeah.
And they were, at that time, the producers, Broccoli and, gosh, I'm thinking of modern day, which is Michael G. Wilson, but Broccoli had another partner.
Was it Herb Stantz or something like that?
No, I
Okay.
should have written it down, but
Yeah.
Broccoli's the more well-known one anyway, because it was always in the family.
Yeah.
Barbara, his daughter, took over eventually.
Harry Saltzman?
Yes, Saltzman.
Okay. Yeah,
So it
Saltzman and
was always
Broccoli.
like Ian Fleming presents James Bond in the Saltzman and Broccoli production of, insert novel here. So
Mhm.
I picked this one because of Austin Powers. I know you've seen those.
Right.
I thought, I think Mike Myers, of all the Bond films, which he makes fun of pretty much all of them, tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
but I thought this one had more elements of that than any of the other ones.
Who does number 2 work
Not
for?
you, who was in Thunderball.
And this is, of course, Robert Wagner we're looking at here as basically a number 2, parody.
Correct,
Lot
and the funny
Powers.
thing is he doesn't have a patch in the novel, so I
Mhm.
think that's kinda comedic that the actor just decided to do it. Same thing with the opening, Bond, James Bond. That was improvised by Sean
Yeah.
Connery, then
Yeah,
became
here's,
the signature.
Adolfo Sealy, who plays Emilio Largo or number 2, right?
Correct.
And why is he number 2, Mike? What's the
Well,
relevance there?
because number 1 is Blofeld, who is basically in charge of SPECTRE, and if you know the name Blofeld and you don't know the original Bond films, you'll realize they brought him back. They brought back Spectre with Daniel Craig.
Mhm.
They've run out of Ian Fleming only wrote 12 novels. So they ran out of Fleming novels. Now, Quantum of Solace was based on a short story by Ian Fleming. But now, instead of seeing, Ian Fleming's novel name, it usually says Bond created by Ian Fleming and then the title. Now, I gotta point this out right up front.
Mhm.
This is Never Say Never Again, which I'm holding up.
Yeah, this is an interesting tidbit here. Now,
And
before you
more
get into
litigation.
that yeah, and before you get into it, maybe little bits I have seen over the years, but this really marks the first time that I've ever watched from start to finish one of the Connery Bond films.
Wow.
So, anyways,
And I have, if you see behind me, I have the 50th collection here
yes.
and then the 60th. And during the 50th, and there's a cool book that came with it that has all the posters from
But
all
don't
the
don't get this don't get distracted. Let's go back for a second because Sean Connery did 7 Bond films, as did Roger Moore. And
right.
his and Connery's last one is where you were about to go with that story about Never Say Never Again.
Yeah, he after filming, what was it, Diamonds Are Forever, I
Forever?
think? That was his final. That's they replaced him the year before with a guy named George Lazenby, and he, like, his ego instantly went insane, and they fired him. So,
Mhm,
they went and got Connery back for a record amount of money, 1.2 million, which he donated to charity, by the way. But because of that salary, they had to cut down on the effects.
mhm.
But the point being is after he made that film, he was quoted a very famous quote saying, somebody said, "When are you going to do another Bond film?" And he said, "I will never, ever do Bond again."
Mhm.
Hence, Never Say Never Again, but it's based on the same novel,
It's basically a
Thunderball.
remake, right?
It's a remake where they switch quite a few things, but
Yeah.
and I
Yeah,
wouldn't recommend that.
and and Thunderball so there's again, we talked a little bit about how, this film was to be the original in the franchise, but then
Yeah,
ends up being, the 4th film.
correct.
You've got Doctor No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and now Thunderball that we're talking about. So and Terrence Young, who directed Thunderball, had also directed Doctor No and From Russia with Love.
And
And
one more.
then no, that
I think he
no,
did
did he
4.
direct another one? I
I
don't
think he
think
did
no,
4.
I think it was just the 3.
Oh, okay, maybe you're
Because then
right.
he walks away, they
Mhm.
do Goldfinger, and then he comes back and does Thunderball. So
Okay.
those are the 3 that he's credited with. Um, talked a little bit about the writing credits. I mean, there were some others there, but you were talking a little bit about that litigation that took place. Sean Connery, who we lost in 2020, of course, stars as 007, and then Claudine Auger, French actress who was 23 at the time. I off the top of my head, I'm not sure how old Connery was, but here's a shot of Sean Connery and
And the
Claudine
character name is Domino, and she's dressed in
Domino.
black and white specifically
Right.
because of the nickname.
Right.
Now
She passed away, this actress, in 2019, the year before Connery, which is kinda wild.
wow, and
Yeah.
now that character in Never Say Never Again, Domino, is played by a very young, unknown Kim Basinger.
Mm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a good that's I could see that. Again, I
Yeah,
haven't seen that one, but I can see that fitting. Then there's, I mentioned Adolfo, Seeley, who plays number 2. I brought that up earlier. Luciana Paluzzi plays a character named Fiona, who I this is her here. We got a shot of her there. Rick Van Nutter, Mike, plays Felix Leiter. Now, this is the first did he play Felix Leiter after this? Because he
yes.
okay, this was his first
This was
appearance
his
as Felix
first
Leiter.
outing. Now the character's been around a lot,
Mhm.
but I think the 2 films after this, they couldn't find a spot for him, so he was not in those 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, he played him more than once, and the character's been played probably 6, 7, 8 times, including Daniel Craig with Jeffrey Wright
Mhm.
playing
Right.
Felix Leiter, and
Correct.
he's the American counterpart that works for the CIA.
Yeah, who I like in that role.
Right.
He's good in that role. Who else? We got Bernard Lee,
M,
plays M, yeah, and then, Desmond Llewellyn plays Q.
the most, Bond movies of anybody was Desmond.
Here's M, so there's,
Right.
Bernard Lee, and then I think I've got a shot of Bond and Q here from Thunderball. Yeah,
An
so they're
interesting note about the 2 of them is they're the only 2 actors that literally died. That's why they weren't in the next Bond film. In fact, Bernard Lee was sick the last 2 films, and they almost replaced him.
Oh, did Desmond Llewellyn not appear as Q after this?
He did,
Oh,
but
okay.
when he went all the way to,
Ri th th
Pierce,
that's what I thought, right, correct,
and
okay.
he was going to be, remember they brought in John Cleese as R, which was kind of a gag,
Yes, I do, yeah.
but he was gonna be in Pierce's final, which is The World Is Not Enough,
Mhm.
but he didn't die of old age, he was in a car crash,
Wow,
hence he
wow.
doesn't appear.
Yeah, he was an older gentleman in
He was
Thunderball,
starting
so
to get old in those Pierce movies.
now this one has got a budget of, I don't know, between 5 and 9 million, somewhere in there, and a very, very, very successful by all accounts, right?
Most
Uh,
successful.
it's almost $64 million,
Yep,
of the and if you adjust for inflation, it's like $1 billion movie
right.
in today's money. So it's pretty which it's interesting though, because like IMDb rating has it a 64 Metascore, and Rotten Tomatoes, the critics have it at 85% and the audience at 73%. And I got to be honest, I'm more with the audience on this one. I'm
Yeah,
in the 73% camp.
yeah.
And I wished I had watched Dr. No and From Russia with Love leading up to it, and Goldfinger leading up to it. But you've got all of the classic bits though. I mean, the opening sequence, the title sequences in Bond are always something that people anticipate.
And they
And
just get bigger and bigger.
and we talked about this before, coming on air, which is the great Tom Jones. You a big fan. You really liked Tom
Oh, of
Jones, didn't you?
course.
Yeah,
"What's
back in
up,
the day.
pussycat? Ma na
What?
na na
Yeah.
na na." I mean,
And so he does the title track here, Thunderball, and it's a
with
great
an
tune.
incredible
Great.
final note,
Yes.
which is Thunderball,
Mhm.
and when he originally recorded it, he passed out
Oh, that's right. I
because he
read
had to
that.
hold it for so long.
I read that.
And
I read that.
also, Johnny Cash had a song, Thunderball, that he submitted for the movie, and they rejected it in
Turned
favor
him
of Tom
down.
Jones. I think
Turned him
Tom
down.
Jones was more popular at
Oh,
the
you know who
time.
I didn't mention, Mike, was Lois, Maxwell, who plays
Yeah,
Moneypenny.
Moneypenny,
Yeah, I forgot to mention her. So
the
there's a shot of her.
flirtation, you can see all the elements
Right.
in
So
this.
right. Exactly. It's this is 1965, folks,
Right,
64. So there's a lot of sexism and things happening here. Again, that's been typical of Bond throughout the franchise.
right.
Um this one, Mike clocks in. This was the first Bond film at over 2 hours. This was 2 hours and 10 minutes. And again, we talk about this a lot and most recently on the podcast, but this is just too long for me. I felt the
I
pacing was
agree.
slow.
And
This
Dan,
could have been a
look at the
nice,
novel.
yeah, a nice tight 90-minute.
Yeah.
Well, how many pages is the novel?
Um,
Would be interesting to know.
God.
Mike is checking the record here on he's got to use a microscope to
128. Now,
see. There
I
you
know,
go.
like, when you talk to movie directors, like, filming 4 pages a day, that's a lot.
Right.
But, there's a lot of details in a novel, and I have
Mhm.
all of the Fleming novels right here behind me. But you're absolutely on point. There was points where it's like, "Oh, you coulda tightened this up."
For sure. I have to agree with some other criticisms I read about there's a lot of underwater sequences in this
A
film,
lot. 25% of the film is underwater.
and that was too much. Like,
Too much.
it does go on too long. But and we had let's back up a second. Give the quick, plot, the summary of this one.
The big picture story is there's 2 stolen nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs that are hidden somewhere,
Mhm.
and Bond, working along with the CIA, are trying to recover the nuclear bombs. That's everything else is kinda window dressing,
Yeah.
the Spectre, the whole thing. That's the story, and that's what you see in Never Say Never Again is that story. The other
Mhm.
stuff is a lot different. You still have Largo, you still have Domino, um, but all the characters that played the classics like Q, M, Moneypenny, they're not in it
Yeah.
because they didn't wanna jeopardize their relationship because that wasn't sanctioned. Ian Fleming sued and finally relented and said, "As long as the film is based on Thunderball, you can make it." So that's how
Mhm.
we got Never Say Never Again.
Now, what are your overall impressions of this film?
I
You've
think
seen it obviously a long time ago. Must have been your first watch, but
no.
oh,
Honestly,
really?
Dan, to be honest with you, the first Bond film I ever saw was Roger Moore, and it wasn't in the theater. It was,
Interesting.
it was on TV.
Hmm.
And they had different versions, like, I don't know if the digital has this, but a lot of them have a television version that takes out a lot of the sex stuff, especially in the opening title sequences. Some
Yeah.
of them get pretty graphic.
Oh, yeah, right. You mean the opening sequence? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
So, honestly, I saw Roger Moore and I think Live and Let Die, and I
Interesting.
watched it because I like Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
So I wasn't like a fan of the film, and honestly, I have all the novels. I've only read Casino Royale.
Oh, see, this is when I thought you would have said, "Oh, I read all the Fleming novels," and yeah.
Nope,
And we saw Sir Paul sing "Live and Let Die." Actually,
we
now
did.
we were viewing it from a hot air balloon over the stadium, but it was Sir Paul, and that's all that matters.
I
So
always joke we were closer to the blimp above than we
yeah,
were to McCartney on stage, and I think that's true.
I was. It's funny because the opening, I'm so glad they eventually moved away from the opening shot where he's in the what do you call that the wave, where he shoots the gun in the very
Right,
beginning
right,
sequence.
right.
They moved away from the fedora. This is
Yes.
kind of goofy. I'm
Yeah,
glad they moved
yeah.
away from that. But the opening of the film is so goofy. We have to talk about the effects here because I'll be honest, the more that I read about Thunderball, the more surprised I was at how much of it was
Real.
practical effects.
Correct. Like the
It's
jetpack.
okay. So let's talk about the jetpack for a second. And I just happen to have the jetpack sequence queued up here because this was but this is real.
That is not a guy on now that's
No,
not real.
correct.
This is real. That
That
is
was
not a
real.
guy on a wire,
No, and
but
and it's interesting too, you saw when they cut away to Sean Connery, and he's wearing the helmet because the guy that was actually operating the jetpack was like, I'm not doing it unless I'm wearing a
without the
helmet."
helmet.
And of course, they didn't, Connery didn't want to because he looks like a goof. He looks
And
like a goof.
literally only 2 guys in the world that were authorized to actually fly that jetpack. Now, the
Right.
jetpack only flew for 30 seconds. It was designed to, like, for combat.
It was for the army, right.
Yes, for soldiers to be able to jump, like,
Mhm.
leap long distances,
Right,
not to fly necessarily, but
right.
and I remember when I first saw it and hearing about it on the, on the news or whatever, that they were real this technology was real.
Yeah.
So rewatching it now, the cut to Connery, it's almost comical.
It's so goofy. I mean, and this is what I had a problem with. And again, I know you have to give grace because it's not it's the mid '60s, but the technology was just so behind at that point. I mean, it was advanced for the day, but you think about Kubrick in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then I'm
Right.
looking at Sean Connery here, like the worst green screen effects
Yeah.
possible, and they're throughout the film. There's a lot of them, but again, I was amazed at how much of it was practical effects, like with all that shark stuff. You read the so tell the story about Connery and the sharks.
Well, first he finds out about it. Somebody tells him in advance, Thunderball has these, scenes with sharks, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Not bloody likely." But cut to the
Terrible,
movie, and
terrible
there's
and offensive English accent,
yeah,
but go ahead.
well,
And
I
he's
try.
actually from Edinburgh, but anyways, good.
Yeah, he's Scottish,
Yeah,
and everybody, makes fun of Pierce for being Irish. But anyway,
anyway.
um, what was your? Now I lost the
The
question.
Shark Tank.
Oh, the shark. Yeah. So they have plexiglass set up to keep, between Connery and the shark. So it looks like he's swimming right next to him, like in a shot dance showing. However, the plexiglass was only 3 feet. The sharks could like swim right over it.
Right.
So that he was literally in danger during the now there's one sequence at the end of it in Largo's pool where a shark's going after him. That was literally a dead shark that they were pulling on a string.
Yeah, and this is another
That's
shot. You
the
see
pool,
this
the
aerial
shot of the
view,
pool.
and they brought in like 15 of these sharks, dumped them in this pool on this location that they found, some mansion, on the coast, but it's just crazy. Yeah, he and I think it's in the film, the shot, it's kind of similar to this where Sean Connery rather, is trying to escape through this you see in this image here, the kinda hatch
Right.
in the pool, and you can see the shark coming out of it, but it's just crazy. And then there was another story that I think took place in this pool where a stunt guy demanded so much extra money or pounds, as it were,
Correct.
because they pushed him into the pool and he had to land on top of one of the sharks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just nuts.
He got
Crazy.
$450 for that. I don't
Well,
think that was enough. Maybe
that
back
was
then it was.
maybe, I don't know. There's also this cool they do this, they had the yacht that the Largo owns
Correct.
is there's this sequence where it, like, separates
Correct.
and it becomes this really super fast speedboat, and
Right.
it's funny in the sequence, he's like, "Jettison the cocoon," and then it separates, and then it takes off. It's pretty cool effect, but again, they built that.
Yes.
It was wild.
And also, because so much was underwater, those things that they were wearing, the breathers or rebreathers, I think Q refers,
Yeah,
those weren't real. They were fake. The
yeah,
actors were holding their breath.
right.
And the story goes is somebody was trying to develop that exact device, went to the set and said, "Hey, let me talk to the technical guy. I'm working on this." And the technical guy's like, "No, these don't work. The
Yeah.
guys are just holding their breath." And in some sequences, there's a lot of people in the water.
A lot. I think there was like 60 divers
Yeah, it
that
was
they
at
had
the
come in
end.
for
And
that.
you know what, Dan? The ending, I don't know if you came across this.
There's the yacht right there.
The ending, which is Bond with the girl, right? There's a whole extended sequence, another battle with Spectre.
Are you talking about this here?
Yes,
Yeah, and this again, this was another goofy combination of practical though, practical effects and, this green screen kinda
right.
segment of it.
And ironically, Roger Moore was crucified as taking over as Bond because he wouldn't do stunts.
Mm,
And the technology just wasn't what it is today. So every time I always think of him skiing,
mhm.
it's just him going like this in front of a green screen, and it's so ridiculous looking.
It is,
Today
yeah.
they could make that look probably pretty real.
So what is your where does this live in the franchise for you? It's so hard because the evolution of
Correct. The
especially a
stunts.
film, yeah, a film that relies so much on technology and advanced, the gadgets we're talking about and the technology. So, it's hard to evenly compare. But where would you put this?
Honestly, I haven't watched these in a while. I've had them like the 50th anniversary, the Oscars were gonna have all of the Bonds come out, and they couldn't get
Hmm.
Connery to do it. And around that time is when I watched it. So that's like 10 years ago. Now with the new 4Ks, I've gone through and watched them. I gotta be honest, I didn't really get lit up by Bond until Pierce took over in GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And it had to do with that opening sequence, and I'm not talking about the dive off the dam, which is incredible. I'm
Hmm.
talking about the motorcycle, which if anybody has seen Dead Reckoning Part 1, you've seen Tom Cruise drive off a cliff, on a motorcycle to land on top of a train, which Tom Cruise does the jump, Pierce doesn't do the jump, but a stunt guy not only jumps off a cliff, but dives into a plane that's nose diving that doesn't have a pilot, gets
Right.
in the plane. From that time on is when I became like really into Bond.
Hmm.
I gotta be honest, these early ones are a little slow for me. They're a little long and a little slow.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where you were going to land with this one, but for me, I'm like, you know, it, mm.
Yeah,
So, but it does make me want to dive in and devour the rest of the Connery films for sure.
right.
I enjoy him as Bond. It's not, but the film itself, again, this was probably 30 minutes or so too long, and also I felt like there were some superfluous characters in here. Like there were almost too many. Well, I was going to say too many. Female leads, co-stars, but I could say
Right.
the same about the male co-stars. There's just a lot of characters. Like the one that this character Paula, I think is her name.
Mhm.
I didn't
She the
understand what
masseuse?
purpose she played. No, no.
Um, see, there's so many, I don't really remember.
Yeah, and there was just too many. I mean, you're
One
talking
thing I
about
do wanna point out, though, is when there's a dance sequence between him and Domino right in front of Largo, which
yes.
he kind of encourages.
Yeah.
Now, before he starts dancing with Domino, he's dancing with another woman, and then she kinda cuts in. That
Right.
other woman was
Who
in
is it?
Casino Royale with Daniel Craig.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought that was kinda like one of those tidbits I would have never known.
That's a nice callback. Yeah.
Yeah, had I not read it. But, Never Say Never Again wasn't the only Bond knockoff. Here's the original Casino Royale,
Okay.
which I bet, and I'm holding it up, you
Oh
may
yeah.
notice him. That's Barry Nelson,
Yeah.
famous American actor. It was a made for TV version. Peter
Yes.
Lorre is in it playing Lashif, who was played by Madge Mickelson,
When did that come out?
1953, I wanna say.
Okay, right. So that's really the first appearance on
That's the first
television.
appearance of
Yeah.
Bond, and then, lo and behold, another Casino Royale loaded with Orson Welles, Peter, um see, I got Peter Lorre in my head, who's, from oh my god,
Mike's gotta go to the
Peter
credits.
Sellers.
Oh, Peter
Peter
Sellers, yeah.
Sellers.
Pink Panther, yeah.
Now, Peter Sellers quits during the making of this,
Mhm.
and they're stuck with no Bond. They cast David Niven. They don't reshoot like they would have done in today's world. They just keep going with a
Dave
different Bond.
David Niven, famously, right at the Oscars, where the streaker comes out and runs
That's
across the
right.
stage, I
Yeah,
believe, if I'm
that's
not
right.
mistaken, yeah.
For people in the '70s.
Yeah, I liked some of the way that they edited the action sequences in this. It's a very interesting style of editing that they use on some of those fight sequences, especially the one in the very beginning. The whole opening sequence is pretty cool. But yeah, again, that's where I land with it. It's just the pacing was slow. One too many characters, and the underwater stuff just got real kind of monotonous and overplayed, I felt.
Yeah, and one of the reasons Connery went away from Bond was because it was becoming more stunt. It was about the stunts. That's what I like.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? The stories get bogged down in those early novels. As they go on and it gets by the time it gets to Pierce, it's so over the top. They have
Right.
to dial it back a little bit with Daniel Craig and Casino Royale.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, Pierce driving the tank down the street and everything.
Driving the tank. I mean,
It's
there's
so
so
great.
many underwater fixing his tie.
Well, and that's the thing, even though they did some pretty impressive things underwater here with some of the stunt, because that was no small feat, and they're also dealing with real sharks in those sequences too, folks.
Yes.
It just, I really was hoping more of it was on land, and we would've got more, car chases with the Aston Martin and,
Right.
stuff. I just so yeah. Yeah, I don't know where to put this because I have to see the other ones, but this one was, I agree. I would agree with the 73%, maybe even go as low as 70% on this one for me.
Yeah, and of the Connery films, I think I like this the best, although
Really?
the length does bother me.
Yeah, it's too long.
Um,
It's too long.
but I think it's better than Goldfinger. I think it's
Mhm.
better than Man with a Golden Gun. Um, Doctor
From
No's a little dull.
from Russia with Love, no?
They have their good points,
No.
but when I look at today's Bond and the way Daniel Craig, even though I didn't like some of those movies, I didn't like the Sam Mendes movies, and I like Sam Mendes. He did 2 Bonds back to back, and but the stunts were outrageous. Think of No Time to Die with the Aston Martin. I mean,
Yeah.
that I don't know how those stunt guys survive some of this stuff.
Well, and speaking of bringing it to the modern day now, so there's as of us doing this episode, there's an announcement that Denis Villeneuve, if we want to say, the proper French pronunciation, although I'm butchering it, but he's been announced as the next director of the next Bond film, which of course there was this whole controversy. We referenced it recently with Amazon MGM taking over from Barbara
Right, they
Broccoli, and,
basically
and
paid her off.
and you mentioned Michael G. Wilson, who's her longtime partner, and so yeah, I mean, it seemed like she had her heels dug in. That was never going to happen, and it
Right.
just goes to show that everybody's got their price. And so,
Not just the $1,000,000 man.
what are they going to do with it now? He, of course, most recently, people would know him from directing Dune and Dune
Correct.
2. Didn't he do the Blade Runner? Um, 2049 or whatever
I
that one is. I
think
haven't
so, which
seen.
is really good.
Yeah,
He's a sci-fi guy. I think he's done Blow Camp
uh-huh.
and, Chappie. There's a couple others.
But he
Uh,
says, he's coming out and quoted saying he's going to honor the tradition and the this that, so we'll see. I don't who
Now I've
knows.
heard rumors of a Dune 3 coming, and those take a long time to shoot. So I don't know if that's happening, if he's doing Dune 3.
I still have not watched Dune 2, if I'm being honest. So,
Yeah.
well, Thunderball, the 60th anniversary, Mike, December 22nd, 1965. You were just a wee lad at that time, and
Oh, I was just a thought in somebody's mind.
I wasn't even a glimmer in the old man's eye at that point. But in fact, yeah, let's be honest. I think if you do the chronology, not
Yeah,
sure that it was a planned situation in the
even
first
I was
place.
like, "I'm getting a baby brother?"
Right, exactly. The best gift, yeah, it's the best gift in all of London. I'm thinking of Buddy Hackett.
I'm
All right, so
Scrooged.
there's one down for me. I'm gonna have to dig into the Connery archives here and look at some of these other ones. But if they're not any better than Thunderball based on your commentary, then that makes me nervous to
I
invest
might
that
not
kind of
get
time.
all the way through them.
Yeah. Well, this is a shake and not stir, and I figured in honor of talking about Thunderball. But anything else to say here to wrap up on Thunderball?
No, just that, I didn't wanna be a fraud and say I read all the novels because I haven't,
Yeah.
and honestly, wasn't a fan until Modern Bond.
Yeah.
So it took a while for me to get on board, and GoldenEye was like an experience in the theater. I remember that.
Do you have any predictions as to who might put on the tux next?
If you asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have had 3 names that were lined up. I don't know.
Mm,
Um, I'd love to see Tom Hardy do it.
mhm.
We talked about that, I think, when we
Yeah.
talked about Mobland. Other than that, what about you? Anyone you see?
No, I mean, there's so many names out there, Michael Fassbender and Henry Cavill. I mean, the list goes on and on. So no, I just hope they stay true. And it's somebody for me. Just want somebody who can perform the action part of it as well as the acting, and also somebody they can invest in for the next at least 5 films.
Right.
I don't want to see a lot of interchangeable things going on here with the next iteration of the franchise under Amazon MGM.
Right, and some of the people I would have mentioned, they're already starting to get up there in the age bracket. Roger Moore was the oldest cast as Bond, and he also was the oldest to play Bond. Even though Sean Connery, that Never Say Never Again was 1982 or 83, I think.
83, yeah.
That was 12 years after he had done. He still wasn't the oldest Bond, it was actually Roger Moore.
That's pretty wild. Would you say this is fitting? Is this a fitting commentary? But it's
I
just
didn't hate it. I think it's a little better than that.
okay. So all right, because
It's a
previously
a bit
Mike
too long,
a bit too long. There's a
a
new
bit
one.
too long.
Mike's ratings. Yeah, I didn't hate it. I definitely hated it, and a bit too long. All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the O Brother Podcast. Been your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.